All right. Hello. Hey, y'all. Hey, it is week 6. I'm super excited. Today, we are talking about rent collection and financial management. This is another important session, things that we're going to talk about today. I believe that people who are successful in property management, they understand that when it comes to rent collection and financial management, this is something that you must master. So let's open up as we usually do. We're going to look at the syllabus. Then we're going to take a look at our weekly student affirmations, and then we are going to get into the discussion. All right, so I know that in some areas it is storming. If you are on your cell phone, if you are on your electronic device, your computer, I just want to say again, please be safe. And thank you for showing up today. We have approximately 2 more weeks left in class. I'm super excited. Also sad at the same time because we have spent a considerable amount of time in class and we have shared a lot. All right, so let me share my screen. We're going to get into the discussion. We may have time towards the end to do a breakout session. I'm not so sure, but if you have any questions as I'm going along and sharing the information today, please drop it in the comment section or feel free to unmute yourself. All right, so let me share my screen and pull up our syllabus for today, just to make sure that we are covering everything that we're supposed to cover today. All right, can you see my screen okay here?
Yes.
All right, so this is week 6. All right, let's go down. Want to make sure that we are on point. So today is rent collection and financial management. So we're going to touch on rent pricing strategies and late fee policies, which is so important. Going to touch on the budgeting and the financial reporting that is required when it comes to property management, whether you're managing a property for someone else or you're doing it on your own. These are some important things that you want to make sure that you understand. And then also understanding the property taxes and insurance. Okay. All right. So I am now showing the student affirmations. Can you see that on your screen here?
No, not right now.
All right. Let's share the affirmations. That's not it. All right. Okay, let's get this up for us. All right, so here we are. Our 30-day affirmations. Many of you know you've already received this. So let's go back to the beginning. So we have someone new. This is their first day in class. The student affirmations is something that I've sent out. I always start my class with student affirmation. So let's take a look at, and I know on the screen here we have 2 sides. Let's focus on some new affirmations today, which is on the left side here. All right, so I'll cite the first one and then you can just jump in. We're only going to read all of what's on the left side. Okay, so let's go here. A productive day full of ideas and opportunities awaits me today. Can someone read the second one, please?
There is a breakthrough waiting for me with my name on it.
Absolutely. Next one, please.
I'm a good listener.
Beautiful. Next one, please.
I have full confidence in my ability to succeed.
Beautiful. Next one, please.
I consciously choose to be happy and optimistic today.
Amazing. All right, let's take a look at this last one here.
I believe in my skills and abilities.
Awesome. All right. So let me pull up our slide deck for today. And again, we are talking about rent collection and financial management. All right, so let me pull it up. All right. right, I am sharing my screen now. All right, let's get into it. Rent collection and financial management. This session is all about keeping the money flowing, as well as keeping the books balanced. How many of you can agree that this is important? It's always important to make sure that that money is flowing, is that there is money coming in. All right, so today our 3 categories of what we're talking about and just having a discussion on today is rent pricing and late fees, how to set fair rent, how to use late fees to promote timely payment. The second category is all about budgeting and reporting, because it's so critical to track that income as well as expenses to stay on top of and manage the finances of that rental property business. And then when it comes to property taxes and insurance, it's always good to understand your financial duties, because ultimately this is what protects the investment. I know that for a lot of people, math may not be their strong suit, but when it comes to property management, one of the things that I always say is that it's so much more than collecting money at the beginning of the month. You have to track that income. You have to track the expenses and determine what's working. If there is no cash flow coming in, you have to look at the strategies. What changes are necessary to make sure that income is consistently coming in? Because ultimately we want to treat the business like a business. If we treat it like a business, it will pay us like a business. But if we treat it like a hobby, then it would also pay us like a hobby. So here's why rent collection matters. Consistent rent means that there is steady income. I always like to say that bricks and mortar don't pay rent, right? So when it comes to the rent and collecting the rent, this helps to cover operating costs as well as property upkeep. In situations where owners or property managers are in the negative because there's no cash flow, they have to take a look at how effective and efficient they are with collecting the rent. Because let's face it, things will break, things will happen at the property. There may be maintenance repairs, there may be an excessive amount of pest control issues. And all of these things cost. But if there is no income, if there's no revenue coming in, it makes it highly impossible to pay those expenses. So rent collection, it impacts the financial planning and the investment goals. So property managers, new or old, should always take a refresher class on finances to improve upon how they are keeping records with the income that's flowing, or the lack thereof. One way to do it is by setting the right rent price. Setting the right rent price is important. I've discussed this in a previous session, because if the rent is too low, let's say, for instance, that rental property is in an area whereas let's say you can get $3,600 a month for rent. But if you're only asking for, or if you're only collecting, let's say, $900, there's a huge amount of income that's left on the table. So to set the right rent price means that you're not leaving money on the table, but you can definitely do that and capitalize off of researching the local rent market, meaning check out what's happening in that community. So you want to check with your competitors or other owners in that in the area of that property. So you want to look at and compare apples to apples, right? So if it's an apartment, let's say it's a 1-bedroom apartment, right? You want to check the rent rate for other 1-bedroom apartments near that community. If it's a single family home, if it's a double wide trailer, whatever the style is, whatever the bedroom size is, that's what you want to compare to other units in that area. You want to factor in property features and amenities. Do they have the same features, such as central air, wall-to-wall carpet, large spacious closets. Does it offer a business center or fitness center? Is it a pet-friendly environment? You want to compare everything or as close as possible to what your rental property offers to what your competitors are also offering. You want to consider the cost. How much is the rent? Is your rental rates compared to their rental rates? Are your rates a little low? Are their rates high? Right? You want to look at everything as close as possible. Take a look at the taxes and look at the profit goals, because ultimately you want to look at the profit off of that rental property. So here's a big tip. Don't underprice and don't overprice, because both of these mistakes can cost you. So let's take a look at if, let's say for instance, you're overpricing it. I talked about the rent price point at $3,600, right? Let's say your competitors are charging $3,600 because that may be the average or the going rate in that area, but yet your rent is $4,500. You're likely not going to be able to rent that property because you're charging too much, which means that that rental property can stay vacant for an extended period of time beyond the goals of that property. So this is why you want to pinpoint the right price. And there are some ways that you can do it. There are some tools that you can do it that are absolutely free. When it comes to late fees and payment policies, I've worked with owners who said, Carissa, I really hate charging a late fee. I don't like to impose on my tenants. I really have a heart for making sure that my tenants can afford to pay the rent, number one, and that we don't create a financial hardship for them. So here's why I strongly recommend imposing a late fee as well as payment policies. Number one, you want to clearly state when the rent is due. You want to identify the due dates and convey that to all the tenants. And you want to make sure that it's clearly spelled out in the lease, including the late fees. You want to do that because when you are consistent in your policies, as you see the tip at the bottom here, you have fewer payment issues, meaning that tenants should automatically understand and know if I pay my rent after the date that it's due, my owner or my landlord will charge me a late fee. See, sometimes we have to train tenants to know how to pay their bills on time. In that lease agreement, it should also indicate if there's a grace period or are you strict with the cutoff. Now, I've worked with some owners who said, well, Carissa, I do charge a late fee. However, my late fee does not kick in until after the 10th of the month. Some people may impose the late fee after the 5th. Whatever that late fee date is, you just want to make sure the tenants understand when it's due and that you are consistently collecting it, right? So you have to choose what works best for you. Now, if you are not using a property management software, I know that some people are not as tech savvy. They could send a letter, whether it's by email, posting it on a tenant's door, sending out a text reminder, like, hey, don't forget your rent is due. One of the things that I do is I've implemented a rent reminder email campaign. So every month, all of my tenants, they receive notification letting them know, hey, don't forget your rent is due. I know that it's vacation time. A lot of people are looking to go to the beach. You're probably looking to go to the pool, but you want to save on those late fees. Don't just give money away. Like, I make it fun, but I also want to remind them, pay your rent first. That's important because I want to help as many people understand to always keep a roof over their heads. So sending out those reminders is a good way to make sure tenants will pay the rent, because it's the summertime, it's cookout time. People may forget, honestly, they may forget to pay their rent, right? Because they're thinking about the fun of the summer, the children in summer camp, you know, maybe summer school, they have other things to do with their finances, but you want to remind them to pay the rent. And a lot of my tenants do appreciate the reminders like, oh, Carissa, yes, I'm completely going to pay my rent on time. Thank you so much for the reminder. Communicating clearly and early with tenants is so important because good communication prevents confusion, it helps to build trust, and it also minimizes mispayments or misunderstandings. So you want to definitely set those expectations early. And again, you want to go over the rent due dates, the late fees, and how to submit their payments. So if they are able to pay their rent electronically, just send out a reminder, hey, you can pay by Zelle, you can pay by Cash App, you can use the portal, or whatever the options are for them to pay their rent. Make it as user-friendly as possible so that the tenant can pay the rent. You always want to keep it professional, which is why you want to use consistency, make sure that it is in writing, and even if you have a conversation in person, because I've had conversations with tenants like, hey, Miss Tenant, Mr. Tenant, don't forget your rent is due. You always want to send it in writing. So a written notice, the text messages, the emails, they are always important. And I would strongly recommend to place a copy of that communication in the tenant file, whether it's a physical file or an online digital file. Always document everything, right? Be approachable. I've had some clients who were not so user-friendly, and that's always bad when it comes to customer service and support. Yes, it is a rental property business, but it's also customer services. So we should do all things professionally, but we should always be approachable. All right, so make it easy for tenants to reach out to you. If they are having a challenge with paying their rent on time, if you have established a rapport of communicating and being approachable, tenants may be more apt to say, hey, I'm going to pay my rent late next month. However, I'm going to make sure that I include the late fee. I'm going to make sure that although the rent is due by the 1st, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, we're going to make sure that we have the rent to you by the 17th or the 18th of the month, right? And so when tenants feel comfortable, they'll reach out to you in advance to let you know what their issues are. They're paying it late. I have one tenant who consistently pays her rent late every month. In a 24-month period, she has likely paid her rent late at least 18 months. But when she pays the rent, she always includes the late fee. She'll say, hey, I'm going to be paying it late. I'm going to pay it on the 23rd of the month. Now, I would rather have a tenant who is honest and upfront to let me know that they're paying the rent late versus someone who won't communicate at all because I already know, okay, the rent is not going to be received by the 1st, right? It's going to be received by the 23rd, right? And so document the file, thank the tenant for letting you know that they have, that you've received their notification, because sometimes people just don't get paid, right? As frequently or as much on time or in advance, or maybe they're not as good with managing their finances. Like there are sometimes a lot of variables that go on in tenants' life. I had a conversation a little earlier with someone and they said life has been lifing for a lot of people. And so when you have tenants who communicate and they are clear, they are honest, always show your appreciation for communicating. Not to say that it's not going to create a financial hardship, but again, I would rather have a tenant who will let me know in advance if they can't make the payment. All right, so let's keep going here. With budgeting for that rental property, there are going to be monthly reports. And when you understand how to master that task, it will help to make your job a lot easier. Tracking the income and expenses. Now, a lot of people do use a property management software. However, there are a lot of people who are still doing it manually. You can do that by using, for instance, an Excel spreadsheet. I've created like a whole system just using the Excel spreadsheet because I recognize that some people are not tech savvy. So you want to always calculate and include any expenses for budgeting, for maintenance, that vacancy loss. All of those things should be tracked and monitored on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, as well as an annual basis. You want to always allocate funding for and plan for those capital improvement repairs or reserves. Usually with capital improvements, that's for your larger items, such as, let's say, for instance, you're managing an apartment building, right? And perhaps the parking lot might need to be repaid, or perhaps you're looking at upgrading or replacing HVAC units or appliances. That's not your routine monthly expense. So that will be considered a capital improvement. So you want to look at, okay, every year, how much money are we going to allocate for these big ticketed items? And make sure that you have it in the budget, right? So you want to look at how much income is coming in for the year. You want to make sure that you are putting money aside for capital improvement repairs, for those regular repairs, for those maintenance improvements, right? Because you want to make sure that money is available. And it's always better to have it and not needing it versus needing it and not having it. So budgeting means that you are managing your property in a smart way. So I know that I touched on the financial reports, but here are just some of various there are a lot of reports that comes into play with property management. So with that income and the expense report, it's tracking the income, it's tracking the expenses, and this helps you to stay organized. Now, these financial reports, like I said, they could be monthly. Some of these may be weekly, just depends on, that really depends on the type of property that you're managing. So of course, the more property you're managing, the more reports that are involved. If you're managing, let's say, one rental property or two, yes, I would still recommend doing those reports, but you may not have to do it so often and you might not have to do it so frequently, right? So with that rent roll report, this is a list of all the tenants, the rent amount for all the tenants, how much they're paying, the status of the vacancies, the occupancy rate, and the cash flow. Now, with that profit and loss statements, the profit and loss statements, it consists of the income. It's going to take a look and help you keep a record of the expenses so that you can see what the profit is. This helps you to evaluate the financial health of that rental property. The cash flow forecast, however, is more of an annual responsibility. So this forecasting is one of the things that usually happens between September and October of every year. So it's usually in that time frame that you're forecasting the upcoming year. So you're taking a look at the current year, you're looking at everything that came in, you're looking at everything that went out, and now you're going to forecast for the upcoming year. Okay, so based off of 2024, this is what we're going to use to forecast 2025 or 2026. So with that forecasting, I like to do a forecasting. I'll take usually a week to just go through everything, looking at how much we paid for paying for maintenance, how much we paid out of pocket for pest control, how much did we have to pay for any upgrades, right? Sometimes in those older properties, we might have to upgrade electrical outlets. How many tenants moved out? How many units did we have to replace the carpet for? So you want to look at everything for that current year and then determine. Sometimes I like to say it's always good to consider a range of approximately 15% for your upcoming budget, right? So if the budget for that current year was, let's say, 52,000, I would say for that upcoming year, that's per unit, right? For that upcoming year, and that's just a high number, right? But for that upcoming year, you want to look at 15% of what you budgeted for that current year. You want to budget an extra 15%, considering the fact that there may be a cost increase, and especially for us, there's a change in the leadership of the United States. And unfortunately, everything has increased. And so the cost of doing business has definitely changed. The cost for maintenance, the things that we've had to pay for, there's a significant increase. You want to make sure that you allocate enough in your budget for that. So that's why that forecasting is important. Let's take a look at property taxes and insurance. So with property tax, sometimes as a property manager, it could be part of your role. Perhaps it may not be part of your role, but I always like to prepare my students for as much as possible. So the property tax is always based on the assessed value, and this can impact your rent pricing. So if you are responsible for or monitoring that property tax as well as insurance, this slide here is going to be important for you. Now, property tax is not something that a property manager determines. That is determined by the government, right? And that's based on the assessed value, not the appraised value. And it can definitely influence how much you charge for rent. So you want to be able to cover all costs. Insurance is important because it protects the investment. So the question then becomes, well, how much insurance is enough? Making sure that you have enough coverage in case there is an emergency, such as a fire, a liability, meaning that perhaps somebody has taken a slip or fall at the rental property. And then also having insurance in place to safeguard a rent loss. Now, tenants' rent insurance is not part of this. We're talking about insurance that protects the investment. So you always want to make sure that where possible, you maintain industry awareness or prepare for possible losses. All right, so we're going to do a few case studies, and then we're going to, if you were on last week, it's going to be very similar to what we covered in class last week. So let's take a look at some case studies here. So here is case study number 1. Rent collection challenges. What are some simple ways that you can remind tenants about rent payments to ensure they are paying their rent on time? So if this is your question that I'm going to assign to you, I want you to think about how you will handle a tenant who is paying their rent late for the first time. How would you approach them without making it uncomfortable? All right, so everybody is going to be assigned a case study. We're going to take a few minutes, and then we're going to just have an open dialogue about the case study. All right, so here's our next one. When it comes to budgeting, here is our discussion question here. If you're managing a rental property, what basic expense would you need to track each month, right? You want to discuss how you could create a budget to keep track of the expenses to make sure that you have enough income to cover that expense. Here's another case study. This is about setting the rent prices. How would you decide on a fair rent price for a rental property in your area? You want to consider factors like the property's condition, location, and nearby rental prices. And then what are some other things that you might think would be necessary when setting a rent price? Here's a fourth one here. When it comes to building positive relationships with tenants, what are some simple things that you think you could do to create a good relationship with your tenants from the beginning? So if this is your case study, think about communication and trust building actions that could help both you and the tenant feel more comfortable and satisfied. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Let's see how many case studies we have. All right, so we have, hey, Ms. Dunmore, welcome to the party.
Hello.
All right, so we have 4 case studies I've shared. All right, so Christine, let me make a note. Christine, are you with us, Christine?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we have Christine. Miss Williams, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Ms. Dunmore. And then we have Kay. Let's see how many case studies we have. See if we have enough. All right. Okay, so let's see. Christine, I am going to assign you to case study number 1. Let me share my screen so that we can see what that is again. All right, so Christine, you're going to discuss the rent collection challenge. Okay, this is your scenario. These are your questions here. Miss Williams, you're going to take scenario number 2, which is about budgeting. All right, Ms. Dunmore, take number 3, which is all about setting rent prices. And Kay, I'm going to have you to take scenario number 4, which is all about building positive relationships with tenants. So let's take about 5 minutes. Come up with a strategy, and then we're going to come back together at 7:41 and we're going to discuss it. Is that all right? All right, Kay, I see your comment in the chat. So if you want to link to the case studies, Kay has dropped that link in the chat for us. All right, so let's come back at 7:41 to discuss our case studies. All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, welcome back. Okay, so we are going to now discuss our case studies. Let's get into it. So, Christine, you have our first case study here, which is about rent collection challenges. Can you unmute yourself? Let me share my screen and let's talk through these.
Okay, so the first question is, what are some simple ways you could remind tenants about rental payments to ensure they pay on time? I wrote down you can send scheduled text or email reminders a few days before rent is due. Question 2, think about how you would handle tenant late with their rent for the first time. I would probably waive the late fee for the first time, but also just remind them that next time I will charge a late fee, and also remind them about their due dates. How would you approach them without making it uncomfortable? I will keep it calm and professional, give them a call, text, or email to remind them about their late payment.
I like that. Did anybody else want to chime in here with Christine? And I think those are good points. That's a good strategy. Did anybody else want to chime in before we move on to Ms. Williams' case study? All right, let's keep going. All right, Ms. Williams, you have case study number 2 about budgeting. Talk to us, please.
Okay, so it would be if you were managing a property, what basic expenses would you need to keep track of each month? I had So it kind of depends on what all is in the lease as far as what all the tenant will cover and won't cover. Um, and I said mostly the maintenance and repairs, which are things like plumbing or pipe repairs, roof repairs, wall, pest control, security, AC, heating system, garage door repair, actually. Um, and how discuss how you could create a basic budget to keep track of these expenses and ensure you have enough income to cover them. Um, I said pretty much putting to the side as far as like it kind of depends on that property. Like if it's a new built property, you'll definitely want to at least have some aside as far as the pricing for different repairs that need to get fixed just in case those happen to go out. If it's an older property, you'll definitely want to have a lot more to the side because those properties tend to have pretty much the major issues that go on, like septic pump or piping or plumbing issues.
That was good. Thank you so much. And I can appreciate the fact that you added extra categories, right? You talked about the septic pump, right? That garage door. So for properties in areas where tenants are not responsible, you have to look at, again, as you said, which is great. Actually, that's perfect. You have to look at what expenses the tenant would pay for. Also factor in any tenant damage. And so that was great feedback. Thank you so much. All right, so Miss Dunmore, setting rent prices, talk to us, please.
Sure. So in deciding on a fair rent price for a rental property in my area, I would research the local market and to compare like the properties that are in close proximity to my rental. I would analyze the property features such as the size of my property, the layout, some of the amenities, as well as the condition of the property. I would consider the location of my property, with respect to the neighborhood that it's in, and its proximity to like, I guess, attractions and things of that nature. And I would also account for for costs such as the mortgage on that property, property taxes, maintenance costs, insurance, etc. That's it.
All right, that's good. I like that feedback and ultimately, when it comes to setting rent prices, one of the things that I did not share is that location is everything. You did touch on what's in the area. Is it close to where tenants want to be? Is it close to shopping and dining? Is it close to downtown, public transportation? All those things are important when setting the rent prices. So thank you for elaborating and touching on those strategy points there. Thank you so much. All right, Kay, building positive relationships with tenants. Talk to us.
All right, so my question states, what are some simple things you can do to create a good relationship with your tenants from the beginning? I definitely think that communication is the strongest link to any relationship. So I would I will offer a hotline or tell them that whatever they need, they can always call, especially in cases of emergencies. When it comes to trust building actions, maybe come up with some type of discount or accommodations that won't take away too much value from what you're trying to bring. Yeah, that's pretty much all I can think of. Um, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, what I do like in all that you've shared, and I didn't talk about this, but with positive relationship building, so you talked about a discount. So and it's, you want to give incentives, right? So in property management, we call that concession. So sometimes where possible, you can give a concession. Let's say, for instance, if there is maybe an apartment building, right? And you have the flexibility, meaning that you have more flexibility because more funding is available. And you can maybe afford to give tenants a 1% discount on their rent off of 1 month rent if they have consistently paid their rent on time. So I do like giving tenants incentives and giving gifts and rewards, maybe a $25 gift card. So can you all remember back to the time where we were in COVID, everything shut down, a lot of businesses, they just went from being in office to closing their office and just doing everything online. So in rental communities, for me, where we didn't allow tenants to come into the office, we still communicated with the tenants. We would do like monthly games such as virtual bingo online, whereas we delivered the bingo cards and markers at each tenant's door, right? We would do things online and the winner would get a gift card, right? And so that's another incentive. That's another way to build good, positive relationships with tenants. And so I do like that. So thank you so much for touching on that, Kay. All right, thank you so much, Christine, Ms. Williams, Ms. Dunmore, and Kay, for your feedback, for taking a case study, unpacking it a little bit, and giving your strategies on how you would handle each case scenario. That's always important, to think through situations that come up, because sometimes we don't really think about what could happen. We don't always think about in advance how we could prepare to make sure that our rental property business or our job is a smooth flowing operation. And so that's why I like to do these case studies, so that we can think in the future, okay, these are things that we want to see happen in our business, on the job. And if you're thinking about getting into property management, or perhaps maybe training others to become better at being property managers. So that's why I like to do these case studies. So here are our takeaways from today's session. We always want to make sure that we are consistent with rent collection. In other words, we don't want to create a situation where tenants don't realize how important it is to pay their rent. So we want to secure consistent income by setting and enforcing clear payment deadlines. We can always do better with using property management software, but if we don't have property management software, I did share how you can use an Excel spreadsheet. But if there is a property management software, this always will simplify the operations to help us track the income, the expenses, and maintenance, because why? We have the right tools to do it. And it makes it a lot easier when we have software. We always want to review those financial statements and the financial health of that property monthly. You want to do a regular check, look at the financial records so that you can stay on top of the cash flow as well as expenses. You always want to stay in the black and not the red. The red would means that the property or that rental property business is in danger. So we want to stay out of the red as much as possible. We talked about how important it is to communicate clearly with the tenants, because this is how we build tenant trust. It's through those honest, it's through those integral and transparent communication practices. All right, so that is it for this week. Rent collection and financial management. Kay will drop the link for the slide deck as well as the newsletter for this week. We're going to send that out promptly. We're also going to send out the recording for this week's session. All right. Are there any questions for today's segment? Any questions that you have for me? Okay, let me take a look at the chat. the question, comment here, just curious. Have you or do you use management software for your properties? Yes, so I manage different properties, so I use Yardi. I'm exploring a new property management software. So I use multiple platforms. Yes, I do. Absolutely. Great question. I see that Kay has dropped the link for the newsletter for this week. For those of you who are watching the replay, if you do want the newsletter, please email me. Every week you should get the newsletter for the class. Every week you should get the slide deck for the class. If there's a case study like today, you should always get that. But if you haven't received it, please email me. And my email address, let me pull that slide back up on the screen. Thank you, Kate, for dropping the link to the newsletter as well as the slide deck. Let me pull my email address back up for those who are watching the replay. So this is my email address here, professorcarissaspan@gmail.com, professorcarissaspan@gmail.com. So if you're watching a replay and you desire the links, the material for this week's class, please email me and I will be certain to make sure that you receive that. All right, so that concludes this week's class. Thank you so much.